Before we get to the show, I want to note that this program is made with support from New York State United Teachers and National Fuel. And we also rely on the ongoing contributions from our listeners. In addition to gifts and food, you can also become a recurring contributor by visiting capitalpressroom.org/donate. A monthly contribution of any amount is better than nothing. And finally, during this interview, you might notice that we don't mention the fact that the governor tapped a new chair for the State Cannabis Control Board. That's because we recorded on Wednesday.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in state government. And on today's episode, we're going to get to the bottom of what is going on with the state's approach to cannabis. And our guest is my favorite marijuana industry talker, Katie Neer, who is of counsel with Dickinson and Avella and represents the Medical Cannabis Industry Association. So in terms of a level-setting question, Katie, the last 4 years since the passage of the MRTA have been kind of like a roller coaster. So how would you describe the current chaos in the marijuana industry? Is this par for the course on this ride? Or are we at a new, exciting downturn? Is this an upturn? Where are we in the chaos?
What a question. What an opener.
Thanks.
I think we're in the final stages of a lot of growing pains that will precede what will be a steady normalcy that's going to wave over this industry and the regulator.
What is that, what I'll call optimism, based on? Have you been consuming a lot of the supply and you're just in a positive mind space right now? In which case, I'd like to know what sort of indica, sativa blend you're on or whatever it is. But why are you optimistic? What are the tea leaves or marijuana leaves you're reading, so to speak?
So let me give a disclaimer that I'm an eternal optimist by nature.
Okay.
So that's sort of my default mood.
But you've worked here for a while and worked in government, so why are you an optimist, period? Why wasn't that beaten out of you?
I firmly believe everything works out. Everything is fixable. Everything will work out.
This sounds like a white privilege thing.
I'm sure it is. Totally is, right? And probably why I'm still the doing the Sisyphean task of staying in this industry, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like a bird that flies into a glass window every single day, and I have been doing that for approaching, 10 years or so in the cannabis industry. So, but even in New York State government, right? Like, I just believe that at the end of the day, things will work out. And right now, yes, there's chaos, and that's felt by any stakeholder involved in this industry. So whether that's a licensee, whether that's staff within OCM, leadership at OCM, probably even some CCB members, legislators, right? I think everyone's feeling some agita, some stress, and some pressure. But what's actually happening day to day right now is this agency is enforcing its regs and its rules for the first time in about 4 years. Or that's not totally fair because they adopted those rules, in like 2023. So in a couple years, right? And so that is painful. That's painful for the people doing that work on the side of the government, and that's painful for the licensees navigating that. But at the end of the day, I think what will be spit out is a functioning agency that's got good governance, process and procedure, and some clarity on what it is they're trying to do. And I think a set of licensees who understand the integrity of the market and the accountability that comes with holding a license.
So that viewpoint on the spectrum of views about OCM and the state's approach to cannabis seems closer to what we heard from the governor's office in the wake of the anonymous OCM staffer letter coming out than the OCM staffer letter. And here's the quote we got from the governor's office. Before Hochul instituted a much-needed reset, the Office of Cannabis Management was in disarray. Illegal shops were springing up across New York. Licensing of legal retailers was stalled for months, and communication between the office and licensees was basically non-existent. We appreciate and consider feedback from all administration employees and outside stakeholders, and OCM will continue down this new path with responsible, steady leadership to grow our legal cannabis market and shut down illegal shops. So it sounds like you're setting up your wagon with the Hochul administration on this then?
I don't know that I would say I'm too aligned with the Hochul administration, but I mean, it was still her administration when that quote gives quite a criticism of the office under her administration.
Who the heck appointed these OCM people?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, it was the governor back in 2021 who was Kathy Hochul at that point.
Exactly. And so, look,
Tim Robinson meme.
Yeah, like I come from a different executive chamber, right, where we certainly had a different approach to agency management. I'd say that, right? And
an iron fist.
Exactly. And this has been somewhat of a headache for, I think, the governor for a long time. And I think she's and her team are doing the best that they can do. And I think the OCM team is doing the best they can do. I think that of the former leadership too, though, right? Like they were doing a job that they thought was the correct and right job to do. Not a lot of people agreed with that. And at the end of the day, they're not in charge anymore, right? There was turnover there. But I do think everyone's approaching the cannabis file with a good faith effort to be doing the right thing, or what they believe is the right thing or the right policy choice. So I give them grace just because you have to in government, and especially when you morph government with what is essentially a startup, which is what OCM is, with an emerging market and an emerging chapter of law. The industry is not new and emerging, but the regulated industry is. And it's really hard and it's super complicated. And I think people think it's really easy because weed is fun, right? Like cannabis is fun. And so people think, oh, how hard could this be?
Are the challenges of our own making, though, or are they the types of things that we were always going to have to deal with when standing up a recreational marijuana space?
Both, right? So I think some challenges are predictable and you can see them play out in other markets. I think the thing that New York is notorious for, whether we're talking about cannabis or any other subject matter, is this refusal to look at lessons learned from other state governments or decision makers or elected officials, right? New Yorkers, we live in a bubble. Our elected officials live in a bubble, in my opinion, right? And staff lives in a bubble. Like every decision maker in the state, we think we're the best state. We think we're the smartest, brightest, best people. I myself think that, right? I am a New Yorker at the end of the day. I think I know everything there is to know about what should and shouldn't be happening when it comes to cannabis policy. I try to be self-aware about that arrogance, right? And then do my research and do my homework and guide my clients accordingly. So that's the saga of New York, right? Like we just never can get out of our own way. So some of this was predictable if you looked at other markets. And some of this is because New York tried to do a cannabis rollout really uniquely and fundamentally different vis-a-vis any other state. And, that wasn't a path that was great for my clients, but I'm able to compartmentalize, right? Like detach from the zealous advocacy I need to do on behalf of my clients and still say like, wow, good for them. Good for them to try to do it differently. Good for them to try to get creative here and try something new. At the end of the day, the principles that regulators need to operate with, in my mind, are really clear, and there's not a lot of room for negotiating those principles in behaving like a regulator. And I think, a lot of that is why there's been so much turnover at the agency. And I think in 12 to 18 months, we will have a normal SLA, gaming commission, maybe even DFS-ish agency.
There's that optimism again.
Yeah.
So using another Z word, zealots. That's kind of what I thought when I read the anonymous OCM staff letter. It is something that reminds me of a corner of the OCM staff that I've spoken to. It reminds me of some of the people in the advocacy space. What did it stir up for you when you read it? Were you like, oh, I can envision the OCM staffer that either wrote or signed onto this? Maybe not the specific person, but the type of person. Or were you like, boy, this came out of nowhere?
No, I don't think I was surprised by it. I had a couple hot takes. I think one was a pretty heavy eye roll and like a man, this has Gen Z all over it, right? Which is like, sorry to any of your listeners who are, who I just kind of stereotyped there, but the boldness to pen such a letter as a staff member or a team member of something that's, bigger than you and your personal kind of opinion, right? The audacity, if you will, right? And then on the flip side of that, I obviously work with OCM staff across multiple departments at all levels every single day, day in and day out. And so I know that what is in that letter is a sentiment that's it within that agency, right? But I think it's just important to know when you take a job in public service or you take a job within an agency or working for an elected official, you're not getting that job or you don't hold that seat because of your personal views. You are holding that job to serve the public and your statutory mandates or serve that person who did get elected to office who's ultimately accountable. And it's his or her personal opinions that drive your day-to-day decisions. And so at the end of the day, I think that's a bold letter. I don't know what their goals were in releasing it.
I mean, I can tell you their goals. Their goals are: do not appoint Felicia Reed as executive director, referring to the acting executive director. Remove Felicia Reed, Susan Filburn, and Amanda Wilson from the leadership roles. Conduct an independent investigation into the workplace culture, retaliation, and staff. Perform a transparent audit of hiring and promotion practices. Appoint permanent, equity-driven executive leadership within the next 90 days. I mean, those are the goals.
Yeah, those are the goals. I don't think they will accomplish any of those goals with that letter. So tactics, strategy, questionable at best there. In my experience, the governor's office has been very clear that the interim executive director, Felicia Reed, for all intents and purposes, is their appointment. Whether she's an acting executive director in perpetuity or gets confirmed, in the next 2 weeks. I don't think that's happening. I think we would all know about that by now. Or confirmed sometime next year. I think that this is her job as long as she wants that job. At least that's my understanding of the situation.
And as long as she doesn't get egg on the governor's face.
Right.
So when we asked Senator Cooney, who was one of the recipients of this letter, to weigh in, my favorite part about his response was that he will closely monitor any steps taken by the governor and OGS to review current agency culture, which to me is indicative of the way the legislature has approached pretty much all the marijuana issues over the last 4 years, really since the passage of the MRTA, which is that they have a 10-foot pole and they make sure that they never get within that 10-foot radius of any of these significant issues. And I'm curious whether you see the landscape the same way or whether you think the legislature has tried to step in and make meaningful changes, not just things around the margins, and they've had like their hand knocked down by the governor.
I'd like to see more leadership out of the legislature.
So you like my 10-foot pole analogy?
I do.
Excellent.
I would agree with that, right? And to be fair, I think the bones of the cannabis law, so the MRTA, are strong, very strong.
Good foundation to build a house on?
Very good foundation to build a house on. Now, the building of that house didn't go as planned, right? And I think that's true no matter who you ask, right? So the execution of implementing that law has been a complete cluster, right, on any number.
You can curse on the show if you want to. You could say
That's
clusterfuck.
true. I heard Chantel say fuck. I did hear that. So it's a clusterfuck.
Mm-hmm.
It is. And I think the legislature has wanted to be a little hands off just to give things room to breathe, right? Room to grow, room to exist. Let's get a market up and running. Let's see what's working and what's not before we start legislating to change what is otherwise a great law. Now, where I think that's kind of becomes more of an excuse than a real answer is that I think there's a lot of empirical data in the market to show the legislature where there's room for them to step in and make some changes. And I hope that they do that.
Are there just, or is there just something taboo about the original law or the different elements that people might want to pull on that prevents them from diving in as the legislature? Is it such a, I guess, precarious alliance that came together to adopt the MRTA that it's hard to put those pieces together to do anything on this in a meaningful way? Or are there other reasons why we don't see action on medical marijuana in a meaningful way, hemp beverages, to talk about one of your favorite things, and other things, whether it's advertising, edibles, whatever? Is there something about those specific issues or this topic more broadly that makes it a challenge for the legislature?
I think it's challenging because it's complicated. So while these issues sound easy or straightforward, they're not. And the marketplace is complicated. And the way people move through it and do business is complicated. And so to make good policy or spit out good legislation, it would require a lot of people to sit down in rooms and really do their homework, really dive in. And the political reality of cannabis is that it is not maybe worth that time and those resources from our elected officials, right? So there's bigger issues, there's sexier issues, there's issues.
What's sexier than marijuana?
Oh man, to me, nothing.
Yeah.
That's my bread and butter, right? To me, it's
That's your
perpetually
kink.
interesting. Yes, but arguably, there's more mainstream issues that carry more political weight, right? Whether you're talking about housing or healthcare or education or whatever, right? Like insurance even, right? You pick your affinity subject matter and there's usually more soft power associated with some of those subject matters,
Maybe not
politically
insurance.
speaking. Well, I think there's some political power
Sure.
in owning that committee, right?
Yeah.
But it's probably boring. I mean, I find it boring, but
A lot of money at play.
yeah, a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of money in cannabis. There's not a lot of political giving, not a lot of political activity. You're starting to see kind of political organizing, associations engage and advocate and communicate and share intel and start to understand like, oh, if we work together and we build consensus positions, for example, we can be more effective lobbying the legislature, educating the legislature, getting something over the finish line. But that's just starting now. For the last 4 years, you've had stakeholders who just love to hate each other, right? And those types of games in Albany equal inaction. And it's hard to get through that inertia. And I think that is the problem with the legislature, right? Like, there's a handful of elected officials in the Senate and the Assembly who give a shit about cannabis. And outside of those, let's say 6 or 7 people.
Wow,
No.
I was going to say like half that number, but okay.
I'm being gracious probably, but like 6 or 7, no one cares. And they are deferential to those leaders, right? Those kind of statespeople of cannabis.
Whatever CPS wants to do, whatever Liz
That's
Kruger
right.
wants to do, whatever
Yeah.
Jeremy Cooney is going to cry about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
When you talked about stakeholders, though, coming together and looking at these issues seriously, it reminded me of what we saw in 2022 with the Commission to study updating our alcohol beverage control laws, the ABC laws, and they had a whole series of meetings. They came out with recommendations. They took votes on it, and the only reforms in the wake of that were around the margins.
Right.
We didn't get any of the major changes, even on things where there was, for the most part, stakeholder agreement. And why isn't that the parallel that we should expect in the marijuana industry moving forward? Not to test your optimism, but if that's how things are in alcohol, why won't the same thing play out in marijuana, where we just get a status quo freeze for the foreseeable future?
We may very well have a status quo freeze for the foreseeable future. When I have this optimism, it's not on a immediate arc or even a 1 year or 2 year arc, right? Like I think it'll take time. I think it might be even 3 years from now before we really see some serious legislative action happen. And
what needs to drive that? Because it seems like there needs to be some sort of event. We need something, either a scandal or some sort of major change. I mean, you talked about people coming together. I don't think that's ever going to move the needle. I don't think any sort of advocacy is going to do it. I think it has to be some sort of problem.
Crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could happen, right? Like you could have a market crash, right?
Yeah.
Like so you've seen that in other markets, right? Where the price falls through the floor and suddenly there's some adjustments. I think we are in a point of crisis right now, at least in the medical market for sure. And I know that we've talked before about this, and like now I'm going to sound like a pessimist. It feels like no one cares in this city about medical cannabis, the medical cannabis program, patients, or operators.
I think your feeling might be right.
Yeah, other than maybe me. And like, I try, right? And so Senator Cooney does sponsor a bill, and Majority Leader People Stokes carries the bill in the Assembly.
Which I think started to get some action.
It is. It's got some action.
I got some LRS alerts recently.
I'm cautiously optimistic that might squeak through here. It passed the Senate. It's on the Codes Committee agenda in the Assembly tomorrow. So it's getting ready to
and for
pass.
Listeners, by the time this airs, we'll actually know what happened, because that'll be on Thursday, and we're speaking on Wednesday, I should tell people.
Yeah, so I'm excited. I'm excited about that bill. That would be an example of them doing something, right? So that bill is big, and it does a lot of stuff in there. Most of the stuff in there makes life easier for practitioners, healthcare practitioners who are participating in the medical cannabis program, easier for patients, which is very important. And then it does have some relief in there, arguably, for the operators. And those two components are that it would authorize reciprocity for out-of-state patients. So if a medical patient from another state in New York, for some reason, the existing operators who have medical stores could serve them, could make a sell to them. And then it also eliminates the medical excise tax, which on its face, it will look like relief to the medical operators because they remit that tax, but it is reflected in the price of the medical cannabis. So we will see probably a 3 to 4% drop in the price of medical cannabis at the point of sale for patients, and that's a big deal too.
If that bill does pass the Assembly, do you think the governor signs it?
I do.
Why?
I think the reality of vetoing it would, I mean, you know where I stand. I already think the administration does not care about the medical cannabis program.
Right.
I've stated that flatly. If they vetoed that bill, that would, I guess, confirm that in a really public way.
So what? From their perspective.
Yeah. Well,
why shrug emoji.
Yeah. Look, at some point here, the patients are going to probably convene themselves and start to advocate directly, right? Like, you can only do, as a new parent myself, right? Like, I am learning as I navigate things on behalf of my kids, right? As they get older, whether it's me fighting with a school district for, a CPSE meeting, right? Or it's fighting with my city because they aren't taking a dog bite seriously, right?
That's our city, Katie.
That's our city, Dave.
That's our city.
Which when we tune out, I got a story for you because
good.
I gotta build some advocates there locally. But I will go to the mat, right? I will do absolutely anything for my kids. The most vulnerable patients in the medical cannabis program here in New York are kids, are people who are under 21 and cannot get the stuff that they need, which is like product forms like powders, right? And things like that. Things that get put into their feeding tubes, for example. Like, I'm talking about extreme situations. Those parents, at some point, will just show up here, right? Or they'll just show up at the governor's office in the city, or find her in Buffalo at a farmer's market and start to tell her what they think. Because it's them, at the end of the day, who have their access points being shut down. So I believe she'll sign the bill if it passes.
I'm curious, given how frank or comparatively frank you are about the marijuana issues relative to other lobbyists who might maybe hold their tongue to a certain degree if they have some thoughts about the governor that aren't the most flattering, whether that's impacted your relationship with the Hochul team at all, because you talk about the past administration, they definitely were one to remember who wronged them. And I wonder if that's impacted your access, whether Chelsea Davis in the governor's office doesn't return your calls anymore, or whether you get hazed to a certain degree. Has any of your advocacy impacted your access or your relationships?
No, I think that they are consummate professionals and good at their jobs. And
Good at their jobs, too.
yeah, look, they don't do what I tell them to do, right? Which is maybe says more about if I'm good at my job, right? But I'm self-possessed in knowing that I'm good at my job and I know what I'm talking about. And I trust that when they're making decisions that go against my recommendation or my advocacy on behalf of clients, that they're doing that with information I don't know about or I don't have. That's giving them the benefit of the doubt. They still communicate with me. They are well aware of my positions because whatever I'm saying to you, you know, I'm saying to them.
This isn't the first time they've heard
Yeah, this is not news, right?
Listeners,
Yeah.
this is still news, just for you guys.
Well,
it's
right.
news.
It's
Yeah.
not news to them,
Right.
right? So they know where I stand. And sure, they didn't go my way on a big massive issue, right? The ROD transition licensing fee, which your listeners are not going to know what an ROD is, but it's a
Registered organization, something dispensary?
with dispensing.
With
That's right,
dispensing.
yeah. So it's a medical operator that wants to get into adult use, stay vertically integrated, and offer adult use products at medical stores. In a nutshell. And as you know, because we talked about it, the budget codified a $15 million transition licensing fee
Yes.
for them. And that's bad news. Bad news for my clients, bad news for medical patients, right? There's bad news for the medical program. In no small part, that is the motivation for the legislature responding now with this omnibus medical bill. So kudos to them to kind of show some leadership and action where they can.
Here's
and
a
when they can.
Band-Aid for your gaping flesh wound.
Absolutely a Band-Aid. It will not turn things around, but it's common sense, good public policy. So I'm excited about the bill. It's not a savior. But while I can criticize the governor's office on that move and be very self-assured that I am right, right? Like I know that I'm right. And we will see the consequences play out for the back half of this year on the implications of them choosing to do that. That doesn't mean there's not 25 other issues working on and talking to them about, and they're still accessible and professional and reasonable on all those other issues. So I don't win everything. I get that. And I still think it's completely fine to publicly criticize decision makers when they don't do something you advocated them to do.
What do you think is the marijuana story we should be watching for the next 3 to 6 months that probably isn't already on our radar?
I'd keep an eye on the medical program for sure.
Like watch it die?
Yeah, or watch
Check
them.
for its pulse?
Yeah, check the
Hey.
pulse.
You.
Watch them pivot, right? Like watch the market.
Into
see
what?
happens.
Sports gambling?
Who knows what? Maybe just straight up adult use licensees, right? Like maybe they just get rid of the medical stuff.
Are they in a position to apply for licenses, or have they already applied for licenses? Because I'm aware of what we call a backlog in handing out licenses. So can you still get into line at this point?
You could. Is that the backlog issue is, I think, stuck to that December queue. They're still working through the
December
November
of
queue
2023?
too. 2023.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a whole that you do a whole episode on that, right? Like there's a lot to talk about on those queues and how 2023 went out with a bang, if you will. And people are still trying to sift through that stuff and clean it up and figure out what to do. And I think that is a mess that's going to take a long time to unwind.
But then how do the ROs get into line, so to speak?
So there is a regulatory provision that contemplates what I call a license swap. It's not drafted to be available only to a certain kind of license. It's broadly drafted to apply to any licensee who's trying to basically get a different kind of license that they couldn't otherwise hold simultaneously with whatever it is they're operating under today. And so I think it's a it's a little gem in the regs, and I think that some desperate medical operators may very well take a look at it.
Who do they swap with? Or do they just swap with their own trade outs?
Yeah, so no one's used this regulatory provision yet in New York, whether they're like medical operators or not. And so I don't even really know what OCM's worldview on this language is or how they contemplated it being utilized. But the way I see it, the way I read it, would be a licensee submits to the office an application or the materials that would be required in an application for a different type of license. And the office is going to have to review it and eventually put it on a CCB agenda. They're going to have to tee that up somehow, right, in like a public meeting and brief and educate the CCB members who then will vote yay or nay on that. And then if you got it, so if they voted yes, then you'd need to forfeit the license you have in exchange for the new one. So think of it as like if you're a retailer right now, but you want to be a supplier. You want to be on the supply side of the business.
Okay.
You could apply to be on the supply side. If the CCB approved it, you would forfeit your retail license and move forward as a supplier.
So how many hurdles are there in terms of actually realizing this swap idea from the medical to recreational transition? Because I have to imagine you got to get through the CCB. The stakeholders in the recreational space already might bring a lawsuit and say this is not kosher. Maybe the legislature finally gets off their ass and passes a bill doing something. And I mean, are there other hurdles that I'm not even thinking of as well to something like that? I don't want you to have to give people ideas on how to block this.
Yeah.
But I mean, am I just beginning to see the top of the iceberg in terms of the challenges?
For sure. Absolutely.
And what would probably prompt a medical player to begin that transition, given how many headaches there are? Is it like finally throwing up your hands and saying, I can't get anything else through the legislature, or we're finally running out of runway for our medical operation? What would finally make someone take that leap?
Great question. The crisis point, if you will, that's going to exist this year for the medical program, which is why I'm like, pay attention to this medical program. Those operators have a license renewal coming up in November of 2025 of this year. They'll start that process sometime this summer. And buried in the adult use regulation, cannabis regulation, is this language that says, in order to be eligible to apply to be in the adult use market, a medical operator must be dispensing medicinal cannabis from 4 dispensing sites. And so the adult use reg, so a self-imposed, problem or rule from the office is that in order to be eligible for adult use, you have to have 4 medical sites open. There's a handful of operators who do not any longer have 4 stores open. And so when they come up for renewal, this is going to be a big issue. So if they can't get renewed for adult use or their license just sunsets, I think they're going to be sitting there in a position of some degree of desperation, trying to figure out what to do next. And so maybe the license swap concept comes into play.
Well, Katie, you came in with the distinction of being my favorite marijuana industry talker, and I'm happy to say you've retained that title after this 30-minute conversation. So we've been speaking with Katie Neer. She's of counsel with Dickinson and Avella, and if you couldn't tell it, based on her focus on medical marijuana, also represents the Medical Cannabis Industry Association. Katie, thank you so much for visiting us in the studio. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. Always happy to be here.
Lastly, is there any other update you can give us as to where we are and what hope we might have that this is the last extender we're going to pass?
Well, Mr. Ra, as I stated in our last dance, that I'm not a good prognosticator, and O'Cornack has not given me any information yet.
Okay.